The morning light drenched Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, its golden rays bouncing off the roofs of colonial and modern structures coexisting side by side. Young President Ibrahim Traoré was getting ready for an unusual diplomatic conference at the presidential palace, his calm attitude and strong stance reflecting this, especially those of the United States, represented by General Michael Langley, commander of AFRICOM. All eyes were clearly on him. Monitors, high-tech gadgets, and secure transmission systems filled the communication area. Fatoumata Diallo, Burkina Faso's foreign policy advisor, and Marcus Johnson, a U.S. military attaché and close friend of the general, were among those at the virtual table with Traoré and Langley. Though the contacts happened via screens, the mood was heated yet courteous. Observing the television, Fatoumata quietly changed papers, expecting what was to follow. Conversely, Marcus appeared certain, as though he already knew the result. Langley started the conversation by talking about what he termed strategic collaboration. He spoke on regional security, American investments, and the need to fight terrorist threats in the Sahel. Though his speech had clear significance, his voice was quiet. This promise of help had something more behind it. He said the United States was willing to offer military help, but implied a need for reciprocity. Without speaking, Traoré focused on the TV and absorbed every word. He already understood the game in progress. Like a storm developing on the horizon, the anxiety was gradually mounting. Something larger was going to occur. Fatoumata saw Traoré's pensive look and understood he was methodically preparing his reaction. Fatoumata grabbed a paper and wrote down some phrases to help Traoré with his speech as Langley went on. She understood Burkina Faso would be critical at this time. Marcus watched everything intently on the other side of the screen, hoping to predict the following actions. Apart from the general's comments echoing across the speakers, the room was quiet. Before he replied, Traoré changed his position. He understood this gathering was about dignity and sovereignty as much as security. Africa had been exploited for ages, and he would not want it to continue under his reign. Taking a deep breath, he got ready to face the strong AFRICOM with the might of his ideas and words. Langley underlined the need of Burkina Faso embracing the American offer as he continued. He underlined the military power of the United States and said that any other choice would be viewed as a rejection of international collaboration. Though Traoré did not miss his patronizing tone, his remarks were well picked. He was obviously attempting to push the young African leader. Seated next to Traoré, Fatoumata leaned in quietly and said, "They're trying to scare us." Traoré stayed quiet but nodded slightly. He understood he had to be careful with his language. This was a question of national honor, not alone of diplomacy. He changed the camera once again to make sure his face was obviously visible. Traoré stared straight at the television when it was his turn to speak. Langley's face shone in close-up. Starting with a straightforward yet sharp inquiry, "General Langley, when have you asked Africans what they really need?" Even via the online link, the quiet that followed was profound. Marcus traded a worried look with Langley. Trying to defend the American viewpoint, Marcus Johnson attempted to interfere. Traoré cut in with a kind but forceful gesture. Speaking on the past exploitation of Africa, hollow promises, and the hypocrisy of Western countries, he went on, "Every word seems to hit the core of the problem." Langley grimaced, obviously unhappy with the course the discussion was headed. Fatoumata was prepared to assist Traoré if required by watching things intently. She understood Burkina Faso's future will depend on this time. Marcus, on the other side of the screen, attempted to take back control of the situation. His remarks seemed empty in comparison to Traoré's. Every passing second increased the stress. Traoré went on, naming particular instances of American involvement in Africa that had caused turmoil and misery. He cited nations where U.S. military involvement has done more harm than benefit. Langley looked more and more agitated and couldn't quickly react to Traoré's critiques. Traoré stopped significantly at the conclusion of his address. Looking straight into the camera, he continued, "General Langley, we are not enemies, but we will not be subordinates either." The remark echoed around the room and left everyone speechless. This fight was obviously far from finished. The discussion developed into a more profound argument. Traoré told tales of African leaders who had struggled against colonialism, of people who had battled for their independence, and of countries now suffering from neo-colonialism. He mentioned particular instances of American meddling on the continent that had caused turmoil and misery. Every statement appeared to resonate throughout the space. Langley unexpectedly stayed quiet for a few seconds. He had not anticipated such zeal and information. His voice was less certain when he eventually answered. Traoré refuted with statistics and information, so upsetting him despite his attempts to claim the United States meant well. Marcus attempted to step in once again, but in contrast to Traoré and Fatoumata's lyricism, his comments were hollow. Traoré stopped in the midst of the conversation. Looking straight into the camera, he added, "We are a continent rich in riches and culture, but tired of being treated like pieces on a global chessboard. That is past time to alter." The time was critical. Langley appeared to hesitate, as though reconsidering his whole strategy. Fatoumata smiled quietly, knowing Traoré was making progress. She understood that now was the time to confirm the message. Traoré went on to say how Burkina Faso may work with the United States without compromising its dignity or sovereignty. He suggested a relationship founded on equality, mutual respect, and shared advantages. You could feel the tension in the room. While Traoré kept his strong and confident stance, Langley appeared to be losing control of the situation. Marcus attempted to calm things down, but it was obvious that Traoré's message had resonated. The discussion was at its peak. When Traoré offered a different proposal, a partnership founded on equality, mutual respect, and shared benefits, the tension reached its height. He explained how Burkina Faso may work with the United States without giving up its dignity or sovereignty. His suggestion was obvious, just, and unavoidably relevant. Langley was unsure. In his military service, he had never encountered such a scenario. Faced with a young, driven African leader, he was up against what Traoré stood for. Traoré's presence was overpowering even through the screen. Though Traoré's comments struck a strong message that the time of unequal relationships was finished, Marcus sought to lighten the mood. Traoré ended his address with a moving statement. "General Langley, we are not enemies, but we will not be subordinates either. Whether or if we should work together as equals is up to us." Even among the background aides, the stillness that followed was total. Langley appeared to be deep in thought about Traoré remarks. Fatoumata grinned quietly, pleased with the result. Marcus, on the other hand, was uneasy, but admitted Traoré's argument's power. The meeting concluded with a promise to keep talking under fresh conditions. Traoré obviously triumphed greatly. Langley asked his advisors for advice and asked the transmission to stop. Traoré and Fatoumata rapidly spoke about the following actions during this time. They understood there was still a lot of work to be done, but this day signified a significant triumph. Traoré's message had been received by everyone viewing the event live, not only Langley. Langley came back with a new attitude when the broadcast started again. He acknowledged that several of Traoré's critiques were justified and that he would be open to rethinking the American strategy. Although not total capitulation, it was a major first step. Traoré was aware that this marked the start of a long road. Traoré's speech went viral on social media and was extensively covered in foreign media in the days after the summit. News outlets all across the world ran extracts of his contributions stressing its clarity, strength, and appeal for equality. Leaders of other African nations voiced their backing, terming his remarks a historic turning point for the continent. Proud of their president, the Burkinabe people planned impromptu street protests to commemorate this diplomatic success. Back in the United States, Langley saw a surge of internal criticism inside the American government. Some government officials criticized Langley for underestimating Traoré's will, challenging AFRICOM's conventional strategy. Analyzing every word said by the young African president, he spent hours in meetings with his superiors. Though annoyed, he acknowledged he still had a lot to learn about the next generation of African leaders. In the days that followed, Fatoumata Diallo was quite important. To clarify Burkina Faso's stance in depth and respond to inquiries from foreign reporters, she coordinated a number of news briefings. Traoré's global standing was reinforced by her eloquence and diplomacy. She underlined that for all of Africa, this triumph was not only personal for Traoré, but also really important. Traoré, for his part, stayed modest in spite of worldwide acclaim. In an interview, he said, "This is not my triumph, but that of an entire people who reject to submit to injustice." Proposing specific projects to enhance regional collaboration in Africa, He labored relentlessly to convert words into action. He also welcomed other countries to participate in a new conversation area centered on equality and mutual respect. The summit also had a major influence on diplomatic ties between Burkina Faso and other African nations. Talks started to build a regional coalition meant to lower reliance on foreign countries. Invited to many international conferences, Traoré expressed his vision for a more just and fair future for the continent. His presence motivated people in other nations to start demanding more open policies from their governments. Traoré was conscious of the difficulties still to come even with his achievements. He understood that military and economic pressures would persist, and that Western countries would not readily alter their behavior. Still, he was set to keep battling for dignity and sovereignty. For him, this gathering signaled the start of a lengthy fight for a more fair world rather than the conclusion. Months after the conference, Traoré's speech still motivated people all around. Students across Africa, Europe, and even the United States examined his involvement as a model of brave leadership and diplomatic defiance. Inspired by his remarks, artists produced works turning his message into songs, paintings, and poetry. His name became linked with dignity and will. Though first condemned, Langley rethought AFRICOM's policy using this knowledge. He set up internal seminars to inform his colleagues about the reality of the African continent and the need of recognizing African countries as equals. Though moved to another position, Marcus Johnson took with him a great knowledge. The strength of words may exceed that of guns. He turned to become a quiet but vocal supporter of more polite diplomacy. True to her dedication, Fatoumata Diallo wrote a book called The Dawn of a New Africa, in which she described the behind-the-scenes of this momentous gathering. Read by leaders all around the world and translated into other languages, the book fast became a success. She wrote in it not just about Traoré's approach, but also about Africa's difficulties and potential remedies for a brighter future. Fatoumata was asked to world conferences where she kept pushing her president's views. Traoré became a legendary figure in African leadership. Invited to world conferences, he expressed his vision for a multipolar world in which every country would have an equal voice. He underlined the need of solidarity among poor nations and suggested establishing an international fund to assist local projects in sustainable development, health, and education. Many nations reacted eagerly to these ideas. This meeting's effects went much beyond Burkina Faso's frontiers. In other African nations, citizen groups started calling for more independent policies, less affected by international influences. Younger generations especially were motivated by Traoré's remarks to assert their entitlement to a brighter future. Signs during continent-wide protests featured slogans such as, "We are not pawns." The tale ends with a contemplative comment from Traoré, spoken at an international conference. True strength rests not in weaponry or economic might, but in the fortitude to defend your values, even when the world attempts to silence you. Nothing will stop Africa's march toward independence and dignity. It is on the move. This remark echoed for years, reminding everyone that dignity and sovereignty are universal principles that had to be protected at all costs.